Mental abuse, psychological abuse, and emotional abuse are terms that people often use interchangeably, yet many still struggle to clearly define what they mean. At their core, they refer to patterns of behavior designed, consciously or unconsciously, to control, destabilize, or diminish another person's sense of self. Unlike physical violence, which leaves visible marks, these forms of abuse operate in silence. They reshape thoughts, distort reality, and slowly erode confidence. They exist because human beings are wired for attachment, power, and survival. When these drives become distorted by insecurity, trauma, fear, or a need for control, they can manifest not as protection and love, but as manipulation and domination. Over time, repeated exposure to such patterns does not simply hurt feelings. It rewires the brain, alters self-perception, and reshapes identity. To understand why psychological abuse develops, we must first understand the human brain. From early childhood, our nervous system is shaped by attachment experiences. When caregivers are nurturing, consistent, and emotionally available, the brain learns safety. The stress response system calibrates properly. The child develops a stable sense of self. But when caregivers are inconsistent, critical, emotionally neglectful, or controlling, the developing brain adapts differently. It becomes hypervigilant. It scans for threat. It learns that love is unpredictable, that approval must be earned, and that survival may require pleasing, shrinking, or suppressing parts of oneself. These adaptations do not disappear in adulthood. They become templates for relationships. Psychological abuse often arises from these maladaptive templates. A person who fears abandonment may control their partner's friendships. Someone who grew up feeling powerless may dominate others to feel safe. A person whose self-worth depends on superiority may belittle others to maintain internal stability. The abuser is often acting from unhealed wounds, but that does not excuse the harm. It explains the mechanism. The behavior exists because the brain seeks regulation. If someone feels chronically insecure, humiliating another can temporarily create a sense of control. If someone feels inferior, criticizing someone else can produce fleeting relief. These are short-term coping strategies that cause long-term damage. At the heart of mental, psychological, and emotional abuse is control over perception. Gaslighting is one of the clearest examples. When someone repeatedly denies your reality, tells you that your memory is wrong, or insists that your emotional reactions are irrational, they are not simply disagreeing with you. They are attempting to destabilize your internal compass. Over time, the victim begins to doubt their own mind. This is not weakness. It is neurobiology. The human brain relies heavily on social feedback to calibrate truth. When the person closest to you consistently contradicts your experience, cognitive dissonance arises. The brain experiences discomfort and tries to resolve it. Often, it resolves it by doubting itself rather than abandoning the relationship. When a person constantly criticizes your appearance, intelligence, or decisions, it reveals more about their internal world than yours. Chronic criticism often reflects projection. Projection is a defense mechanism in which a person disowns parts of themselves they find unacceptable and attributes them to someone else. A deeply insecure individual may accuse their partner of incompetence because acknowledging their own insecurity feels unbearable. Their behavior communicates fear of inadequacy, fear of exposure, fear of losing control. When they mock or belittle, they are temporarily elevating themselves to avoid confronting their own vulnerability. If someone frequently alternates between affection and coldness, offering intense love one day and withdrawal the next, this pattern reveals emotional inconsistency rooted in attachment instability. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful conditioning tools in psychology. When rewards are unpredictable, the brain becomes more attached, not less. Dopamine spikes in anticipation, not just reward. The victim begins chasing approval, trying to return to the good version of the partner. This push-pull dynamic is not accidental in many cases. it maintains dependency. Body language in abusive dynamics also tells a story. An emotionally abusive person may invade personal space during conflict, using physical proximity to intimidate without touching. Their tone may shift subtly, calm and controlled while delivering cutting remarks, creating confusion. They may maintain prolonged eye contact to assert dominance, or conversely, avoid eye contact when confronted with their own wrongdoing, signaling shame masked by defensiveness. The victim's body language over time often changes dramatically. Shoulders become rounded. Eye contact decreases. Speech becomes hesitant. Laughter becomes apologetic. The nervous system adapts to chronic stress by moving into survival modes: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Many victims adopt the fawn response, prioritizing the abuser's needs to reduce conflict. When a person stops expressing opinions around their partner, it is not passivity. It is learned caution. It suggests that previous attempts at self-expression were punished with ridicule, anger, or withdrawal. When someone constantly seeks reassurance before making simple decisions, it indicates internalized doubt. Their confidence has been systematically undermined. Conversely, if someone in a relationship freely expresses thoughts, sets boundaries, and disagrees without fear, it signals psychological safety. The absence of fear is not indifference. It is security. Emotional. Abuse often includes silent treatment. Silence, in this context, is not a healthy cooling-off period, but a weapon. Social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. The brain processes exclusion as a threat to survival because evolutionarily, isolation meant danger. When someone intentionally withdraws communication to punish, they are triggering primal fear. The victim may feel panic, obsess over what they did wrong, and scramble to restore connection. This dynamic reinforces power imbalance. Another common pattern is minimizing. You're too sensitive. It was just a joke. You're overreacting. These statements invalidate emotional experience. Psychologically, they serve to maintain dominance by framing the victim's reaction as the problem. Over time, the victim may suppress emotions entirely. Emotional suppression, however, does not eliminate feeling. It redirects it inward. This can lead to anxiety disorders, depression, and psychosomatic symptoms, such as headaches, gastrointestinal issues, and chronic fatigue. Jealousy disguised as love is another manifestation. Excessive monitoring, constant questioning, and isolation from friends are framed as protection. But underneath lies fear and control. Healthy love trusts. It allows autonomy. When autonomy is restricted, the message is clear. I do not feel secure enough to let you exist independently. The behavior reveals attachment anxiety and often deep-seated abandonment trauma. In daily life, psychological abuse can look subtle. It may be a partner who jokes about your dreams in front of friends, gradually making you stop sharing aspirations. It may be a parent who compares siblings relentlessly, shaping lifelong self-doubt. It may be a boss who praises publicly but humiliates privately, keeping employees off balance. These patterns create cognitive distortions in victims. They begin to believe, I am not capable, I am too emotional, or I cannot survive alone. These beliefs are not inherent truths. They are implanted narratives reinforced over time. Decision-making becomes impaired under chronic emotional abuse. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and planning, functions less effectively when the brain is in prolonged stress mode. Cortisol levels remain elevated. The amygdala becomes hyperactive. The victim may struggle with concentration, memory, and problem-solving. This is often misinterpreted as incompetence, but it is a stress response. When someone appears indecisive in an abusive relationship, it may indicate neurological overload rather than personality weakness. Social interactions also shift. Victims may withdraw from friends out of shame or because they have been conditioned to prioritize the abuser's comfort. They may defend the abuser publicly, a phenomenon related to trauma bonding. Trauma bonding occurs when cycles of abuse and intermittent kindness create strong emotional attachment. The brain associates relief from pain with love. This bond can feel intense and confusing. Outsiders may ask, "Why don't you just leave?" But leaving means confronting not only fear, but also neurochemical dependency. When someone does not show typical signs of distress despite being in an abusive environment, it does not necessarily mean they are unaffected. Some individuals dissociate. Dissociation is a psychological defense in which the mind distances itself from overwhelming emotion. They may appear calm, detached, or even cheerful. Internally, however, they may feel numb. Numbness is not healing, it is protective shutdown. The long-term consequences of mental and emotional abuse are profound. Self-esteem erodes gradually. A person who once felt confident may begin to view themselves through the abuser's lens. Depression can develop as hopelessness takes root. Anxiety may manifest as constant worry about making mistakes. Post-traumatic stress symptoms can appear, including intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance, and exaggerated startle responses. The body keeps the score, storing stress in muscles and organ systems. Relationships outside the abusive dynamic may also suffer. Trust becomes fragile. The individual may either avoid intimacy altogether or gravitate towards similar patterns because familiarity feels safer than the unknown. This repetition is not self-sabotage in the simplistic sense. It is the brain seeking what it recognizes. Healing requires conscious repatterning. Productivity often declines under chronic psychological abuse. Creativity requires safety. When the mind is preoccupied with survival, there is little energy left for innovation or ambition. Even daily tasks may feel overwhelming. The individual may question their abilities constantly, leading to procrastination rooted in fear of criticism. From a psychological analysis perspective, clinicians look for patterns rather than isolated incidents. Everyone argues. Everyone makes mistakes. Abuse is about repetition, power imbalance, and intent to control. Psychologists observe language patterns. Does the person frequently use absolute terms like always and never to criticize? Do they deflect accountability? Do they invalidate emotions consistently? Therapists also assess emotional triggers. If a person becomes disproportionately angry when questioned, it may signal fragile self-esteem. If they respond to feedback with humiliation tactics, it often indicates deep-seated shame. Behavioral analysis also examines inconsistencies between public and private personas. Many emotionally abusive individuals maintain charm externally. This duality can make victims doubt themselves further. Psychologists explore attachment history, childhood experiences, and belief systems. They pay attention to micro-expressions, tone shifts, and physiological responses during recounting of events. A victim describing normal arguments while showing signs of fear, tightened posture, shallow breathing, suggests minimization. Recovery involves rebuilding internal trust. The victim must relearn to validate their own perceptions. Cognitive. Restructuring helps challenge implanted beliefs. Somatic therapies address stored stress in the body. Healthy relationships provide corrective experiences where boundaries are respected and emotions are acknowledged without punishment. Ultimately, mental, psychological, and emotional abuse share a common core: the systematic undermining of another person's autonomy, reality, and worth. They thrive in silence and confusion. They persist when power is unbalanced and accountability is absent. They damage not only emotions, but identity. Yet awareness is powerful. When individuals understand the mechanisms, attachment wounds, projection, conditioning, trauma bonding, they begin to see patterns clearly. Clarity disrupts control. As we conclude, remember that psychological abuse is not defined by bruises, but by erosion. It is slow, subtle, and often invisible to outsiders. But its impact is real and measurable in the brain, the body, and the story a person tells about themselves. Healing begins with recognition. It continues with support, boundaries, and sometimes distance. And it culminates in reclaiming the narrative of who you are, not as shaped by someone else's fear, but grounded in your own inherent worth.